The rain fell in sheets that blurred the line between sky and river, turning Portland's bridges into hazy silhouettes against the November dusk. Harper Ellis clutched the railing of the steel bridge, her knuckles white as bone, whispering to the churning water below, "What if I let go? Just once." The words dissolved into the downpour, but they echoed in her chest like a fracture widening, pulling her toward the abyss she had spent 17 years building walls against, for someone else's sake, never her own. Harper had always believed that wounds healed cleaner when you ignored them, like the way fog rolled off the Columbia River Gorge at dawn, swallowing the scars of yesterday's storms. But on that rain-soaked evening, as the city lights flickered like distant fireflies through the mist, the old ache resurfaced, raw and unrelenting. It had started with a phone call 3 weeks earlier, the kind that arrives unannounced and upends the fragile architecture of your life. "Harper, it's Lydia." She's gone. Lydia, her partner of 14 years. The woman whose laughter had once chased away the shadows in their cramped Victorian house on Northeast Alberta Street. Gone. Not in the poetic sense of wandering off into the woods for a solo hike, but in the brutal finality of a car accident on I-5, the highway that snaked through Portland like a vein pulsing with the city's restless energy. Harper had been in the kitchen, chopping onions for a stew that neither of them would eat, when the call came. The knife slipped from her hand, embedding itself in the cutting board with a thud that mirrored the hollowness blooming in her gut. She sank to the linoleum floor, the scent of onions stinging her eyes more than any tears would that night. Lydia had been the steady one, the architect with blueprints for remodels and dreams, the one who planted wildflowers in their backyard despite the relentless Oregon rain. Harper, a high school English teacher at Lincoln High, had always been the dreamer, the one quoting Whitman in the margins of lesson plans, believing words could mend what the world broke. But words failed her now, scattering like leaves in the wind as she replayed the paramedic's voice. It was instantaneous. She didn't suffer. The days blurred into a monochrome haze. Harper moved through her routines like a ghost haunting her own life, grading papers on The Great Gatsby with hands that trembled, the irony of Gatsby's green light mocking her from the pages. Nick Carraway's line about carrying unbearable sorrows to the end haunted her. So we beat on. Boats against the current. She beat on, but the current dragged her under. Colleagues offered casseroles wrapped in foil, their sympathy as warm as the food but just as temporary. "Take all the time you need," Principal Ramirez said, her voice soft with the cadence of someone who had buried her own husband a decade ago. But time was the enemy now, stretching empty hours into nights where sleep evaded her like a skittish deer in the underbrush. Portland, with its craft breweries and food carts steaming under awnings, felt alien in its vibrancy. Harper walked the Hawthorne district, past murals of blooming roses and indie bookstores stacked with dog-eared copies of poetry, but the colors seemed leached of life. She avoided the places they had loved, the Saturday markets at the PSU farmer's stall where Lydia would haggle over heirloom tomatoes, the trailhead at Forest Park where they held hands under the canopy of Douglas firs, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and possibility. Instead, she gravitated to the edges, the Willamette's banks, where the river's murmur drowned out the city's hum, and the wound in her chest could breathe without judgment. It was there, on that bridge, that the memories clawed their way free. Not just of Lydia, but of the girl she had saved, the one whose eyes had mirrored her own hidden fractures all those years ago. Riley Kane. 17 years old then. a runaway with tangled blonde hair and a backpack stuffed with nothing but defiance and despair. Harper had been 25, fresh out of grad school, subletting a studio in the Pearl District, scraping by on freelance editing gigs. She had spotted Riley huddled in a doorway off Burnside, rain pooling around her sneakers, a cardboard sign scrawled with "Will work for food" trembling in her small hands. Something in Harper had stirred that night, a recognition, perhaps, of the homelessness she had narrowly escaped herself. Her own mother had vanished when she was 12, leaving Harper to navigate the foster system's indifferent shuffle through Seattle's outskirts before she clawed her way to Portland on a partial scholarship. She knew the taste of isolation, the way it settled in your bones like winter frost. Without a word, Harper had crouched down, offering a thermos of hot coffee laced with whiskey from her own meager stash. "You look like you could use this more than I do," she had said, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. Riley had eyed her warily, those blue eyes sharp as shattered glass. But she took the thermos, sipping it like it was the first kindness in months. They talked, or rather, Harper talked, spinning stories of poets who turned pain into verse, while Riley listened, her shoulders slowly uncoiling. By dawn, Harper had convinced her to crash on the futon in her studio. No strings, just a hot meal and a lock on the door. It wasn't charity, it was survival. Two souls recognizing the frayed edges of the other's tapestry. Over the next months, Harper became Riley's unofficial guardian. She enrolled her in night classes at a community college, drove her to job interviews at coffee shops along 23rd Avenue, and listened as Riley unraveled her story, a father lost to opioids in rural Montana, a mother who chose a new family over the old one. "I thought running would fix it," Riley confessed one evening, as they shared takeout pad thai on the fire escape, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. "But everywhere feels like nowhere without a place to belong." Harper had held her then, a tentative hug that bridged the gap between Minter and something deeper, unspoken. It wasn't romantic, not yet, and perhaps never in the way the world labeled such bonds, but it was love, fierce and unyielding, the kind that stitches wounds before they fester. Riley thrived under that care. She dyed her hair a rebellious shade of copper, landed a barista gig at Stumptown Coffee, and dreamed of art school in San Francisco. When she left 2 years later, backpack now filled with sketchbooks and a one-way bus ticket, she hugged Harper tight on the platform at Union Station. "You saved me, Harp." Don't ever forget that. Harper hadn't forgotten. She had carried Riley's gratitude like a talisman through her own milestones, the teaching job that grounded her, the day she met Lydia at a book reading for Barbara Kingsolver's latest novel, the quiet wedding in a backyard meadow under a canopy of maple trees. But now, with Lydia's absence carving hollows where joy once lived, that talisman felt like a weight. As the rain eased to a drizzle on the bridge, Harper pulled her coat tighter, the fabric heavy with water and regret. She had saved Riley from the streets, but who would save her from this drowning? The wound pulsed, a reminder that healing wasn't linear, but a river carving canyons through stone. Harper turned from the railing, her boots splashing in puddles that reflected the sodium glow of street lamps. She walked home through the quiet streets of the Northeast, past bungalows with porch lights flickering like beacons. Inside her house, the air hung still. Lydia's half-read novel splayed on the coffee table, a bookmark marking the chapter on loss. Harper sank onto the couch, the silence pressing in, And for the first time in weeks, she allowed the tears to come, not in sobs, but in a quiet stream, washing over the edges of her grief. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the cascades, a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Harper closed her eyes, picturing the mountains she and Lydia had hiked last summer, their peaks dusted with snow even in July, standing sentinel against the sky. "We'll climb them again," Lydia had promised, linking their fingers as they crested a ridge, the world sprawling below in verdant waves. Now, those words echoed hollow, but they stirred something, a faint spark, buried deep. Perhaps the wound was not just an end, but a beginning, the earth's way of cracking open to let spring through. As sleep finally claimed her that night, cradled in the worn armchair by the window, Harper dreamed of rivers merging, of a girl with copper hair returning on the current, her hand extended not in need, but in offering. The dream lingered into morning, the light filtering through lace curtains like tentative fingers, coaxing her awake. She rose, brewed coffee strong as resolve, and stepped into the day, unaware that the girl from her past was already on a train bound for Portland, her own scars itching for the chance to mend another's. The fracture came not with a crash, but a slow splintering, like the ice on the Willamette in January, cracking under the weight of unseen currents. Harper threw herself into work with the fervor of someone fleeing a fire, her classroom at Lincoln High becoming a sanctuary of chalk dust and adolescent chaos. The students, a mosaic of Portland's diversity, kids from immigrant families in Cully, trust fund rebels from the West Hills, sensed the shift in her. Their English teacher who once paced with the passion of a revival preacher now moving like a shadow. "Ms. Ellis, you okay?" asked Theo, the quiet poet with braids down his back, during a discussion on Toni Morrison's Beloved. His eyes held the weight of questions he wouldn't voice, the empathy of youth that sees through adult veneers. "I'm navigating," Harper replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her hazel depths. Navigating. The word felt apt, evoking the river pilots who guided barges through the locks, steering against the pull of undertows. But her own course veered wildly. Nights blurred into marathons of grading and planning, her red pen slashing through essays like a surgeon excising tumors. She avoided mirrors, the reflection there showing hollow cheeks and eyes ringed with fatigue, the freckles stark against skin paled by grief. Lydia's side of the closet remained untouched, dresses hanging like ghosts in dry cleaner bags, their floral scents fading into the ether. Friends tried to intervene with gentle insistence. Clara, her oldest confidant from grad school, a librarian with a laugh like wind chimes, showed up one Saturday with a thermos of chamomile tea and a stack of memoirs on widowhood. They sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill wind rustling the Japanese maple, its leaves a carpet of crimson decay. "You can't keep punishing yourself, Harp," Clara said, her voice soft as the steam rising from their cups. Lydia wouldn't want this isolation. "Remember how she dragged you to those poetry slams downtown? The way she'd cheer like you were headlining Carnegie Hall." Harper nodded, the memory surfacing sharp. Lydia in the crowd at the Hollywood Theater, her applause thunderous after Harper read a piece on lost mothers, the words tumbling out like confessions. But the recollection twisted, laced with the bitterness of what-ifs. What if she had driven that night? What if she had convinced Lydia to stay home? To forego the client dinner in Vancouver? The questions looped endlessly. A Mobius strip of blame that tightened around her throat. "I know," she murmured, staring at the garden where Lydia's wildflowers wilted untended, their petals curling like clenched fists. "But every step feels like betrayal." Clara stayed until dusk, sharing stories of her own fractures. A divorce that left her adrift in a sea of alimony checks and empty wine bottles, reminding Harper that broken things could be reassembled, stronger at the seams with gold leaf, like the Japanese art of kintsugi. But as Clara's taillights faded down the street, the house closed in again, its walls echoing with absence. Harper wandered the rooms, trailing fingers over surfaces, the kitchen island where they danced to Coltrane on lazy Sundays, hips swaying in sync, the bedroom where Lydia traced constellations on her back, whispering, "You're my North Star, Harper. Always guiding me home." The fracture deepened in solitude. She stopped cooking, surviving on yogurt cups and apples from the farmer's market, the sweetness turning sour on her tongue. Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams where Lydia reached for her across a chasm widening with each breath. Waking drenched in sweat, Harper would pace the creaky floors, the old house in Alberta Arts District groaning in sympathy, its gingerbread trim a relic of Portland's bohemian past. She considered therapy, the pamphlets from the school counselor's office stacked on her desk like indictments, but the thought of unpacking her grief aloud felt like exposing a nerve to salt air. One evening, as twilight bled into the sky over Mount Hood's silhouette, Harper found herself at Powell's City of Books, the world's largest independent bookstore, a labyrinth of solace. She wandered the fiction aisles, fingers grazing spines worn by countless hands, Alice Munro's collections of quiet devastations, Jhumpa Lahiri's tales of displacement. In the LGBTQ+ section, a slim volume caught her eye, Carol by Patricia Highsmith, its cover a faded photograph of two women in profile, their gazes locked in unspoken yearning. She bought it on impulse, carrying it home like contraband. Curled on the couch that night, the rain pattering against the bay window like insistent fingers, Harper read until the words blurred. The story's undercurrent of forbidden love and lingering loss mirrored her own, Teresa's wide-eyed wonder echoing the girl Riley had been, Carol's poised elegance a shadow of Lydia's grace. But it was the ache of separation that undid her, pages turning damp under falling tears. "What do you do when the person who held your world together slips away?" she whispered to the empty room, the question hanging unanswered in the lamplight's glow. The next day brought a storm fiercer than most, winds howling through the Selwood Bridge like mournful wolves. Harper's phone buzzed during lunch duty, a number she didn't recognize flashing on the screen. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a prickle at the nape of her neck, like the air before lightning, made her answer. "Hello, Harper? It's Riley." Riley Kane. The voice was deeper now, edged with the confidence of years, but laced with that same Montana lilt, warm as sun on sagebrush. Silence stretched, thick as the fog over the river. Harper's heart stuttered, memories flooding back. Riley's first awkward hug goodbye. The sketch she left behind, a portrait of Harper under a canopy of stars, captioned "My Anchor." "Riley," Harper breathed, the name a lifeline tossed into turbulent waters. "How? Where are you?" "On a train. Pulling into Union Station in about 2 hours. I heard about Lydia. From Clara. I'm coming home. Harp. Not to take, but to give back." The call ended with promises of coffee at Tin Shed Garden Cafe. But Harper sat frozen in the faculty lounge, the fracture in her chest shifting, not mending but realigning. Riley, the girl she had pulled from the brink, returning not as a shadow of the past, but a force-bearing light. As the bell rang for afternoon classes, Harper gathered her things, the weight of anticipation mingling with dread. The river outside churned, mirroring the turmoil within, but for the first time, the current felt like it might carry her forward, not under. Union Station hummed with the low symphony of arrivals, the screech of brakes on wet tracks, the murmur of travelers shaking off the chill, the scent of espresso from a nearby cart mingling with diesel exhaust. Harper arrived early, her umbrella furled against her shoulder like a surrendered flag, the platform slick underfoot with puddles that captured fragments of the overcast sky. She had dressed carefully, jeans faded to the softness of memory, a cable-knit sweater in Lydia's favorite shade of evergreen, boots scuffed from trails they never finished. Her hair, still damp from a hurried shower, framed her face in loose waves, and she had even applied a touch of lip balm, the ritual a small rebellion against the numbness. Clara's words from the night before echoed as she scanned the crowd. Riley's made something of herself. Harp. Artist now. In San Francisco. Exhibitions. The works. But she never forgot you. Harper nodded to herself, the information settling like silt in a stream bed. 17 years. Enough time for canyons to form, rivers to redirect. What would Riley see in her now? The savior reduced to a husk? Adrift in a sea of condolences and half-empty mugs? The train from the south pulled in with a hiss of steam, doors sliding open to disgorge passengers bundled against the Pacific Northwest's perpetual drizzle. Harper's breath caught as she spotted her. Riley Kane. No longer the waif with defiant eyes, but a woman of 25. Poised and vivid. Her hair, once a wild mop of copper, was now a sleek bob the color of autumn chestnuts, tucked behind ears adorned with silver hoops that caught the light. She wore a tailored wool coat over slim trousers and ankle boots, a leather satchel slung across her body like a shield, and in her hand, a bouquet of dahlias, bold reds and pinks, their petals defiant against the gray. Their eyes met across the platform, and time folded. Riley's smile broke first, tentative then blooming, her blue eyes crinkling at the corners with the warmth of shared secrets. She wove through the throng, dahlias thrust forward like an offering. Harper Ellis, she said, voice husky from the journey, pulling her into a hug that smelled of train seats and bergamot perfume. God, it's good to see you. Even if it's under these clouds. Harper returned the embrace, her arms wrapping around Riley's frame, stronger now, curved with the assurance of adulthood, inhaling the familiarity that bridged the years. The dahlias pressed against her back, their stems cool and dewy. You look incredible, she murmured, pulling back to study Riley's face, the faint scar above her eyebrow from a skateboarding mishap in their Pearl District days, the laugh lines that spoke of joys unshared. San Francisco suits you, Riley laughed, a sound like sunlight-piercing fog, linking their arms as they navigated toward the exit. It does, but Portland's pull is stronger. The rain. The rivers, it's in my blood now. Thanks to you. They stepped into the taxi stand, the air crisp with the promise of evening, and Riley directed the driver to Tin Shed, the garden cafe nestled in the shadow of the Moda Center, its outdoor patio a haven of fairy lights and potted herbs even in November. The cafe was a cozy refuge, strung with Edison bulbs that cast a golden halo over wooden tables scarred by years of shared meals. They claimed a corner booth, steam rising from mugs of tomato bisque and cider mulled with cinnamon, the warmth seeping into Harper's chilled fingers. Riley unwrapped her scarf, revealing a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a tiny anchor pendant, the one Harper had given her on her 18th birthday. "Still wearing it," Riley said, touching it absently. "Reminds me of home." Conversation flowed haltingly at first, skirting the edges of the present like deer testing a frozen stream. Riley spoke of her life in the Bay Area, the studio in the Mission District where she painted murals of fractured skies and resilient figures, the gallery openings where collectors vied for her canvases, the community of queer artists who became her chosen family. "I owe it all to you," she said, stirring her cider, the spoon clinking softly. "That first night in your studio, you didn't just give me a bed. You gave me permission to dream bigger than survival." Harper listened, her heart a tangle of pride and pang. She shared snippets of her own path, the teaching that anchored her. The house on Alberta with its creaky stairs and sun-dappled kitchen. The love with Lydia that had bloomed slow and deep, like moss on ancient oaks. But when Riley's gaze sharpened, probing gently, Harper faltered. "And now," Riley prompted, her voice a bridge over the chasm. The words tumbled out then, unbidden, the accident, the void it left, the way grief wrapped around her like barbed wire, drawing blood with every breath. Harper's voice cracked on the details, the twisted guardrail, the funeral under a sky heavy with unshed rain, the nights when the bed felt like an ocean too vast to cross. Riley reached across the table, her hand covering Harper's, callous from brush and canvas, steady as the earth after quake. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Lydia sounded like the kind of love that reshapes you. Losing that. It's like losing your compass. They sat in the hush that followed, the cafe's murmur a distant lullaby, hands linked in silent communion. Outside, the city pulsed on bikes whirring past on bike lanes, food trucks firing up grills for the dinner rush, but in that booth, time suspended, two women reclaiming a thread from the past. Riley broke the silence with a story from their early days, the time they snuck into a midnight screening of Thelma and Louise at the Clinton Street Theater, cheering as the car sailed off the canyon, freedom's reckless arc. "You said it then," Riley recalled, a smile tugging her lips. "That sometimes the bravest thing is turning back to face what's broken." Harper squeezed her hand, the gesture small but seismic. "I don't know if I have that bravery left." But even as she spoke, a flicker stirred, the recognition that Riley's return wasn't coincidence, but convergence. Two rivers meeting at last. As they paid the bill and stepped into the night, arms linked against the wind, Harper felt the fracture shift again, not sealing but allowing light to seep through the cracks. Riley had booked a room at the Ace Hotel downtown, but she insisted on walking Harper home first. The streets of Old Town alive with neon signs and the low thrum of live music spilling from brewpubs. They talked of lighter things then, Portland's evolving food scene, the new mural Riley wanted to paint on a warehouse wall, inspired by the very bridge where Harper had teetered that rainy evening. "I'd call it currents," Riley mused, her breath visible in the cold air. "How we carry each other, even when we're adrift." At Harper's doorstep, under the glow of the porch light, they lingered. Riley pulled a small wrapped package from her satchel, a sketchbook, its cover embossed with pressed leaves from Montana's plains. "For your words," she said. "Fill it when you're ready. Or don't. Just know I'm here. Not as the girl you saved, but as the one who wants to walk beside you." Harper clutched the book to her chest, the leather cool against her sweater. "Thank you, Riley, for coming back." Their goodbye hug stretched, foreheads touching in a moment of profound stillness, the world narrowing to the shared rhythm of their breaths. As Riley vanished into the taxi's taillights, Harper unlocked her door, the house no longer a tomb but a space holding possibility. She placed the sketchbook on the coffee table beside Lydia's novel, the two objects guardians of her heart. Sleep came easier that night, dreams weaving Lydia's smile with Riley's steady gaze, a tapestry of loss and return under Portland's watchful stars. Understanding arrived like the first crocus pushing through February snow, tentative, fragile, but insistent in its bloom. The days following Riley's arrival unfolded in a rhythm both foreign and familiar, Harper's routine gently reshaped by the presence of this woman who had once been a charge, now an equal bearing quiet wisdom. They met mornings at the Sunday market in the Pearl, baskets swinging as they navigated stalls heaped with artisanal cheeses and bundles of kale glistening with dew. Riley's energy was a bomb, her questions probing without pressure, drawing Harper out like sunlight coaxing roots from soil. One such morning, as they sipped lattes from a cart run by a barista with tattoos of ferns climbing his arms, Riley turned the conversation inward. "Tell me about the parts of you Lydia uncovered," she said, her blue eyes steady over the foam. "Not the grief, but the joy, the hidden facets polished to shine." Harper hesitated, then spoke of the Lydia who baked scones at midnight when inspiration struck for a lesson plan, flour dusting her nose like fresh powder on Hood's slopes, the one who curated mixtapes of folk singers with voices like smoked honey, played on road trips to the Oregon coast where waves crashed against haystack rock like applause for their love. Riley listened, nodding, her own stories emerging in turn, the mentors in San Francisco who taught her that art wasn't escape, but excavation, the lovers who came and went, teaching her the grace of release. "I dated a sculptor once," she confessed, biting into a warm cider donut, sugar dusting her lips. "She carved marble like it owed her something fierce, unyielding. But it ended because I realized I was still holding space for unfinished business. For you, Harp. Not romantic. Exactly. But foundational." The admission hung between them, light as the steam from their cups, heavy as the river's undercurrent. Harper felt no awkwardness, only a deepening gratitude. This bond, forged in the crucible of vulnerability, transcending labels. They walked to the waterfront then. The East Bank Esplanade, a ribbon of path winding past public art installations, abstract sculptures of twisted metal evoking resilience, benches etched with poetry about migration and homecoming. Riley paused at one, reading aloud a verse by a local poet. "We forgive the river for flooding, because it remembers how to recede." Forgiveness, that elusive bird Harper had chased in vain, began to perch then, its wings brushing her soul. It started small, sorting through Lydia's closet not with sobs, but sighs of release, donating dresses to a women's shelter in Southeast Portland, imagining them swirling on bodies reclaiming their stride. Riley helped, folding garments with care, sharing anecdotes that lightened the load. "This one," she said, holding up a sundress patterned with wild poppies, "screams Lydia dragging you to that wildflower festival in the gorge. Bet she twirled you under the cliffs." Laughter bubbled up. Unexpected. A spring breaking through stone. Harper could see it, the festival's golden light. Lydia's skirt flaring like flames. Their hands clasped as petals rained down. "She did," Harper admitted. The memory no longer a blade but a bridge. In those moments, forgiveness flowed toward herself, for the guilt that whispered she should have foreseen the accident, for the years she poured into others while neglecting her own hidden fissures. Evenings brought deeper dives, often at Harper's house where the fire crackled in the grate, casting shadows that danced like memories on the walls. They cooked together, simple fare like risotto simmered with mushrooms foraged from nearby woods, the steam filling the kitchen with earthy promise. Over wine from the Willamette Valley, poured into mismatched glasses, Riley shared her own scars, the panic attacks that gripped her in her early 20s, echoes of Montana's abandonment, the gallery rejection that nearly sent her spiraling back to the streets. "I called your number once," she revealed, swirling her Pinot Noir, its legs trailing like tears. "Late night. 3 years ago. Hung up before you answered. Didn't want to burden the woman who gave me wings." Harper reached for her hand, the firelight gilding their knuckles. "You could never burden me, Riley. You were the spark that lit my own path." Understanding bloomed there. Mutual and profound, they had both been saviors and saved. Their stories intertwined like vines on a trellis, supporting growth amid the thorns. One crisp afternoon, they drove to Multnomah Falls, the Columbia River Highway, a winding vein through the gorge's emerald heart. The trail misted with spray from the cascade, 620 feet of water plummeting like liquid silver, the roar a thunderous absolution. They hiked the short path to the bridge, arms brushing as they leaned on the railing, the mist beating on their lashes like tears of release. "This place," Harper said, voice nearly lost in the din. "Lydia called it our reset button. After arguments, we come here. Let the water drown out the noise." Riley nodded, her coat beaded with droplets. "And now? Does it still work?" Harper closed her eyes, the vibration of the falls pulsing through her bones, washing away the residue of blame. "Yes," she whispered. "It forgives me for surviving." Back in the city, forgiveness extended outward. Harper visited the accident site on I-5, a stretch of highway flanked by billboards for craft beers and evergreen motels. Riley drove, her presence a steady hum beside the roar of traffic. They pulled over at a viewpoint, the river glinting far below, and Harper scattered a pinch of Lydia's ashes, saved from the urn on the mantel, into the wind. "Go where the current takes you," she murmured, the act a ritual of letting go, the breeze carrying Lydia's essence toward the sea. Riley wrapped an arm around her shoulders, their silhouettes etched against the vastness. "You're braver than you know, Harp. Forgiving isn't forgetting, it's making room for what's next." As they drove home, the gorgeous cliffs rising like ancient guardians, Harper felt the weight lift. Forgiveness not a destination but a companion, walking hand in hand with understanding. The evenings grew longer, laced with tentative hopes. A poetry reading at Literary Arts where Harper shared a verse on rivers and returns, Riley's applause the loudest. Sketches Riley drafted of Harper amid the falls, capturing not sorrow, but quiet strength. In those unfolding days, the bond between them deepened, a quiet romance of souls, not the fire of youth, but the steady glow of embers, warming the spaces grief had chilled. Harper began filling the sketchbook, words spilling alongside Riley's illustrations, poems of fractures mended with gold, of girls saved and saviors healed. Forgiveness, she realized, was the gorge itself, carved deep by relentless flow, yet standing eternal, inviting the light. Rebirth stirred in the subtle greening of March, when Portland's skeletal trees donned tentative buds, and the Willamette ran clearer, shedding winter's murk. For Harper, it manifested not as a thunderclap epiphany, but a gradual unfurling, like the ferns uncurling along the sandy river trail where she and Riley now wandered on weekends. The path wound through old-growth forest, sunlight dappling the mossy understory, the air alive with the trill of returning songbirds. Riley's laughter echoed off the basalt cliffs as she skipped stones into eddies, her throws precise from years of skipping classes to practice by Montana creeks. "Your turn," she called, handing Harper a smooth river rock, its surface etched with quartz veins like whispered secrets. Harper's toss was clumsy, the stone plopping without a skip, but she grinned unforced, the expression cracking the last shell of reserve. "Pathetic," she teased, and Riley feigned offense, splashing water that sparkled in the light. These outings were sacraments of renewal, picnics of cheese and figs from Providore Market, journals exchanged mid-trail where Harper's poetry intertwined with Riley's marginalia, doodles of anchors entwined with wild rivers. Lydia's absence lingered, a soft undercurrent, but no longer a riptide. Harper carried her in the locket Riley had gifted, a silver oval engraved with beat on, tucked against her heart. The rebirth extended to her work, the classroom blooming with renewed vigor. Students noticed, their essays sharpening with insight, discussions on Audre Lorde's Zami crackling with the electricity of shared truths. "Ms. Ellis, you're glowing," said Mia, the non-binary sophomore with a buzz cut and a penchant for speculative fiction, during a circle share on identity. Harper paused, the word landing like pollen on receptive ground. Glowing. She attributed it to the longer days, the vitamin D piercing the clouds, but knew the truth. Riley's return had coaxed her from dormancy, sunlight to her shade-loving soul. Evenings at home transformed the house from mausoleum to hearth. They collaborated on a mural for the backyard fence, Riley's vision of a river goddess emerging from fractured stone, Harper contributing verses painted in looping script. From the wound, the wildflower rises. Neighbors gathered for the unveiling. An impromptu block party with potluck salads and bluegrass from a fiddler down the street. Clara raised a toast with elderflower spritz. To rebirths. In all their messy glory, Harper clinked glasses with Riley, their eyes locking in a moment pregnant with unspoken vows, not of possession, but partnership. Two women choosing each other amid life's tempests. Yet rebirth demanded reckoning, the shedding of old skins. One stormy night, as thunder rolled over the Tualatin Mountains, Harper confronted the boxes in the attic, Lydia's blueprints, yellowed with time, sketches of unbuilt homes stacked like deferred dreams. Riley knelt beside her on the dusty floorboards, flashlight beams cutting swaths through the gloom. "What do we keep?" Riley asked, her voice a steady anchor. Harper sifted through the papers, fingers tracing Lydia's precise lines. A cabin in the Cascades with a widow's walk for stargazing. A seaside cottage on the Olympic Peninsula with waves lapping at the foundation. The dreams, she decided, selecting a few to frame for the living room wall. The rest they burned in the backyard fire pit, flames devouring the past in a rite of pyre, sparks ascending like prayers into the rain-lashed sky. As ashes scattered on the wind, Harper felt unburdened. The space cleared for new blueprints, not of wood and mortar, but of days yet to be drawn. Riley's influence wove through these shifts, her art becoming a mirror for Harper's emergence. She invited her to the studio she rented in a converted warehouse in the Central East Side. Walls papered with studies of light-fracturing water, palettes smeared with cerulean and sienna. "Model for me," Riley urged one afternoon, positioning Harper by a window where sunlight slanted through grimy panes. Clothed in a simple linen shift, Harper stood as Riley sketched, charcoal whispering over paper, capturing the curve of her jaw. The way grief had etched subtle lines yet softened her gaze to something luminous. "You're not just surviving anymore," Riley said later. Over takeout pho from a cart on Division, steam curling between them. "You're blooming, Harp. Like those trilliums in Forest Park, quiet, but impossible to miss." Harper blushed, the compliment warming her like the broth's ginger bite. Their connection deepened in these intimacies, a hand on the small of the back guiding through crowded markets, forehead kisses after long days, the unspoken poetry of bodies attuned without haste. Community amplified the rebirth. Riley connected Harper to a grief circle at the Queer Resource Center, a sunlit room in the basement of a church on Hawthorne, where women shared stories over herbal teas, tales of partners lost to illness, estrangement, time's inexorable tide. Harper spoke haltingly at first, her voice gaining strength with each circle, the women's nods a chorus of solidarity. "Rebirth isn't linear," an elder named Eleanor intoned, her silver hair braided with beads. "It's a spiral, circling back to touch the wound, each pass gentler, inspired." Harper channeled this into a school project, a literary zine on wounds and wildflowers, students contributing pieces on personal fractures, bullying, family rifts, the ache of unpronounced identities. Riley illustrated the cover, a stylized bloom rising from cracked earth. And at the launch in the school library, parents and peers mingled under banners of pressed leaves, the air humming with hope. As spring crested, they took a pilgrimage to the coast, driving Highway 101 in Riley's battered Subaru, windows down to taste the salt-laced wind. At Cannon Beach, they walked the tide pools at low ebb, starfish clinging to rocks like stubborn hearts, waves retreating to reveal secrets buried in sand. "This is us," Harper said, linking fingers with Riley as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the Pacific in strokes of rose and gold. "Exposed, but enduring." Riley squeezed her hand. "The oceans roar their underscore. And when the tide returns, we ride it." That night, in a driftwood cabin rented for the weekend, they talked until dawn, dreams of collaborative exhibits, hikes in the Wallowas, a life woven from mutual tending. Rebirth, Harper understood, was not erasure, but integration. Lydia's light folded into her core, Riley's warmth a new dawn. As they watched the sunrise from the porch, gulls wheeling overhead, Harper felt whole, not unscarred, but resilient, a woman reborn in the arms of those who chose her, the river of her life flowing onward, deeper, toward unseen horizons. Light filtered into Harper's world like the dawn over the West Hills, gradual and golden, chasing shadows from corners long dimmed. Summer arrived in Portland with uncharacteristic mercy. Blue skies arching over rose gardens in full riot. The air humming with cicadas and the sizzle of barbecues. Harper's rebirth had taken root. Branches extending into a canopy of possibility. Riley at her side not as crutch, but co-pilot. Their days a tapestry of quiet adventures and profound stillness. Mornings began with coffee on the back porch. Mugs steaming as they planned the day. A volunteer shift at the shelter where Harper had first met Riley all those years ago. Now expanded with a community garden blooming with sunflowers nodding like sentinels. Together, they tilled plots with residents, women and non-binary folks rebuilding from evictions and heartbreaks, hands in soil that yielded tomatoes plump as promises. Full circle, Riley murmured one afternoon, wiping dirt from her brow, as a young resident with wary eyes handed Harper a seedling. "You're planting more than veggies here." Harper nodded. The earth cool between her fingers. The act a metaphor for her own tending, the garden of self, once overgrown with weeds of doubt, now pruned to flourish. Evenings brought art and words. Riley's studio sessions where Harper read drafts from the sketchbook, poems evolving into a chapbook titled River's Return, its pages a dialogue of ink and image. A local press accepted it for a fall release. The editor's email arriving like confetti. "Your voices resonate, redemptive, real." They celebrated at screen door. Plates piled with fried chicken and collards, toasting with sweet tea that tasted of southern summers neither had known but both claimed. The light touched Lydia's legacy too, transforming memory from dirge to hymn. Harper hosted a memorial hike in her honor, inviting Clara, students, and shelter friends to Forest Park's Wildwood Trail, a ribbon of path through 5,200 acres of verdant sanctuary. They carried wildflowers, foxgloves and lupins gathered from the backyard, and at a clearing with a view of the city sprawl, Harper spoke. "Lydia taught me that love isn't a finite resource, it's a river, feeding tributaries long after the source quiets." Riley stood beside her, bouquet in hand, and as they scattered petals on the breeze, the group shared stories, Lydia's blueprints inspiring a teen's architecture dreams, her laughter echoing in imagined replays. The descent brought catharsis, bonds forged in the uphill climb, light piercing the canopy to dapple their faces. Their love, too, clarified in the light, not a blaze, but a steady luminescence, the kind that illuminates without scorching. It unfolded in gestures, Riley braiding Harper's hair before a gallery opening, fingers gentle as prayer, Harper surprising her with tickets to a symphony at the Arlene Schnitzer, violins swelling like heartstrings in the velvet hush. Intimacy was in the pauses, a shared silence on the couch, heads on shoulders, the tick of the grandfather clock marking time's generous flow. "I love you," Riley said one night, words simple as starlight, as they swayed to a playlist of Joni Mitchell in the kitchen, bare feet on cool tiles. Harper's response was a kiss, soft and sure, sealing the vow. "And I you, as anchor, as current, as home." Portland embraced their union, the city's progressive pulse a heartbeat syncing with theirs. They joined a queer book club at another read-through, dissecting works like Sing Unburied, Sing by Jessamine Ward, discussions veering into personal reckonings under the shop's exposed beams. Friends multiplied, Eleanor from the Grief Circle hosting solstice bonfires on her farm in Scappoose, where they roasted marshmallows and swapped tales under a Milky Way unmarred by city glow. "You've both come through the dark," Eleanor said, sparks ascending like liberated spirits. "Now, carry the light for others." As autumn hinted with crimson maples along the Banfield, Harper's chapbook launch drew a crowd to Powell's, the Pearl Room aglow with readers clutching advance copies. Riley unveiled a companion exhibit in the foyer, canvases of rivers merging, figures entwined in gold-leafed embraces, her artist's statement a love letter to the woman who saved me, and in saving, taught me to save myself. Harper read from the stage, voice steady as the Snake River's flow. In the light after fracture, we find not endings, but ever beginnings. Applause washed over them, Claire's whoop cutting through. And in the afterglow, amid signings and hugs, their hands found each other, fingers interlacing like roots in fertile ground. Yet the light held space for nostalgia's soft ache, a hoary mist on clear days, reminding without overwhelming. On anniversaries, Harper visited the steel bridge at dusk, Riley at her side, the water below no longer a siren call but a mirror reflecting growth. They tossed pebbles inscribed with gratitudes, for Lydia's enduring spark, for Riley's timely return, watching ripples expand into infinity. The wound was the door, Harper reflected, the city lights igniting like a constellation. And you turned the key, Riley leaned into her, the wind off the river carrying whispers of promise. Together, we stepped through, as winter approached, snow dusting the evergreens like powdered sugar. Their life unfolded in layered warmth, holiday lights strung along Alberta's arts corridor, a New Year's Eve bonfire on the beach at Seaside, waves lapping at driftwood piers. Harper, once adrift, now steered with purpose toward exhibits in Eugene, workshops for at-risk youth blending poetry and paint, a future sketched in shared visions. In the quiet of their home, fire crackling against the chill, Harper traced the anchor at Riley's throat, the metal warm from her skin. You returned to heal me, she murmured. But we've healed each other. Riley's smile was the light itself, blue eyes reflecting hearth and heart. And in that, we've found our way home. Outside, Portland slumbered under a blanket of stars, the river murmuring eternal benedictions, carrying their story onward, toward horizons bright with the faith that after every shadow, dawn arrives, gentle and inexhaustible.